Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the international affairs, foreign policy, and global development community, and world news aficionados of all stripes. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. On Sunday, May 23rd, a Belarusian fighter jet intercepted a civilian Ryanair flight and forced it to land in Minsk, Belarus. Authorities promptly arrested a dissident journalist on board named Roman Protasevich and his girlfriend, Sofya Orlosky, who is a Russian national. This incident was an audacious example of the lengths that the regime of Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko would go to silence opposition voices and dissidents. Lukashenko has been in power for over 27 years, and Belarus is often described as Europe's last dictatorship. In August 2020, his regime faced its most significant challenge in years when hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets to challenge the results of obviously fraudulent elections, which once again saw Lukashenko re-elected. My guest today, Sofya Orlosky, is Senior Program Manager for Europe and Eurasia at Freedom House. We kick off discussing why Lukashenko's regime would seek to capture Roman Protasevich in such a way. We then have a discussion about the policy options that the European Union and the United States are currently weighing in response. We then conclude with a conversation about what this incident says about Lukashenko's relationship with Vladimir Putin, who aspires to join Russia and Belarus in a formal political union. So obviously, the forced landing of this civilian airliner is both a horrible example of the lengths to which a regime would go to silence a dissident voice, and also, I think, a useful entry point to discuss ongoing repression within Belarus and the international community's evolving relationship with Lukashenko. And I think this conversation does a good job of introducing all of these topics. As always, if you have suggestions of people I should interview or topics I should cover, please do send me an email. You can do so using the contact button on globaldispatchespodcast.com or hit me up on Twitter at Mark L. Goldberg. Enjoy the episode. Now here is my conversation with Sofya Orlosky of Freedom House.
So Roman was mostly known as a co-founder of this highly popular Telegram channel and YouTube channel, Nechta. And he's an independent journalist who has had a number of engagements. And most recently, he was managing the social media account, which roughly translates as Belarus of the brain. And as you can imagine, all of these projects have been highly critical of the incumbent Alexander Lukashenko and his government.
He was just this young kid who, as a high schooler, I understand it, just sort of got involved in political activism.
Right. And of course, not alone. And there are a lot of like-minded individuals who have been working with him on a number of these projects. And especially with Nechta, the Telegram channel, it's actually several Telegram channels at this point. There's an actual team that has been managing content and input from ordinary citizens and verifying it and posting it to the Telegram channels. But yes, he's a very interesting and very bright representative of this new generation of Belarusian youth who have lived their entire lives under the rule of this authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko, and who have been exposed to various ideas just through proximity to Europe and because we live in a globalized world, the internet, and they really want something better for their country and for their own future. So he's kind of this very interesting example of the youth.
And what sort of role did he play in the protests in the late summer? And I should point listeners to an episode I did during the protests at the time. What was his role during that sort of chaotic moment over the summer?
So what we know is that Roman was part of the team behind the Nechta channel that really kind of coordinated citizens' desire to be together at the time of the protests and really shine light on the brutality of the Lukashenko regime as it was dispersing the protests, the variety of violent acts that were being committed during the time, especially in the summer. So there have been a number of media pieces actually that have talked about Nechta and have had interviews with the team, including Roman, about their work during that time. And so I actually encourage your listeners to check those out.
So what do we know about what happened on May 23rd?
So what we know, and the events were developing very quickly, and there was a frenzy of social media activity on Sunday, is that there was a Ryanair flight that was en route from Athens to Vilnius, so from Greece to Lithuania, and that it was forced to make an emergency landing in Minsk, literally minutes before it would have reached the airport in Vilnius. And as the events were unfolding, we were getting kind of bits and pieces of information, and it started kind of looking like there was a concerted action on behalf of the Belarusian government to deploy actually a military airplane to force the civilian flight to land in Minsk. And so there is a little bit of unclarity of what happened first and who gave what orders. But it sounds like the air traffic control in Minsk warned the crew on the airplane that there was supposedly a bomb threat. And after some time, presumably because the crew wasn't turning around or wasn't doing anything to land, it appears that the military jet was deployed to actually force them to land.
And I should say, it has subsequently come to light that this supposed bomb threat was manufactured at least 24 minutes after the plane had already been ordered to land. So This is clearly like a BS kind of excuse in order to justify their operation, which captured Roman and his girlfriend, his traveling companion, who's a Russian national.
Exactly. And
it's my understanding that, all the passengers except those two and a few presumably Belarusian security personnel and Secret Service agents or whatnot, KGB agents, everyone else left Minsk, but that crew stayed.
Right. There was an interesting episode as well with this bomb threat because originally Belarusian officials pinned it on Hamas, and actually Hamas spokesperson came out and said that this is not us, and this is archaic of the Belarusian authorities to be manipulating our name like that. So it's very curious.
Yeah. So in the days since, we've seen these videos from Roman and his girlfriend, Sofya Sapega, a Russian national. Supposedly they're confession videos. Can you just describe what these videos were and what these two individuals said?
So first, there was a video released of Roman himself where he is kind of reciting a number of things, essentially saying that he's being treated fairly and that he's cooperating with the investigation and that he's giving testimony, like corroborating testimony. It wasn't clear for what offenses the testimony was. And there was a number of comments from people who know Roman that he didn't look authentic, like energy level and just his disposition was different. So there are very good reasons to believe that this was done under pressure.
And I've also seen reports, I believe it was from like a friend or his mother, who said he's wearing a lot of makeup, clearly to cover up bruises.
Yeah, it's actually kind of observable on the video. And there were a number of of course, on social media, folks do enlargement and start speculating what this is. And definitely something is amiss in his appearance.
And that video, at least to me, harkened back to August, when the political opposition leader was lured into some government office, essentially kidnapped and forced out of the country.
Yes, absolutely. And it was Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is the exiled presidential contestant who presumably was the candidate who got the most votes during the elections. And as we found out, she was forced to give that recorded message, and which was done, I believe, in the offices of the Central Election Commission chairperson.
Yeah, I mean, basically, this is like Lukashenko's playbook.
Yeah, I mean, this is common. This is also common in other places around Eurasia. We actually see a lot of kind of these forced confessions and apologies becoming routine, in Chechnya and Ingushetia in Russia, and actually across Russia. And it's a very disturbing trend.
So what has been the response so far by the European Union and the United States to this really audacious intelligence operation to force down a civilian airliner and capture a dissident journalist?
Right. Well, the response was, of course, outrage. And, there is this, in the foreign policy field, there's kind of this contradiction that there's a lot of concern being expressed and a lot of condemnation being expressed. But citizens of countries and activists in countries that are being affected, they kind of grow wary of these just very verbal expressions with no action that follows after that. And so the EU considered fourth package of sanctions. There has been a lot of conversation about additional targeted sanctions, including on individuals who are implicated in this operation. Now, there have been very strong calls for the International Civilian Aviation Organization to conduct an investigation into what happened and the exact circumstances of the incident. And then on the United States side, several lawmakers, of course, condemned the event. But we also know that President Joe Biden actually issued a statement. This is the first statement out of the president's office on Belarus and this administration. And Jake Sullivan of the National Security Council actually had a call with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya.
The opposition leader.
Yes.
Interesting. So, it seems that, there's been your conventional condemnations and expressions of outrage. Also, right. The banning of flights from the national airline of Belarus, and a determination that European civilian airliners should not cross airspace over Belarus. It seemed just a blanket or an attempt to ban flights is the most has been the most obvious and first way that governments have tried to impose a measure of sanction on Belarus. But you said that the Europeans are considering a fourth round of sanctions. What might that entail, and how likely are those sanctions to come to being?
Well, there are a number of calls to actually broaden the list, right? Both in Europe and in the US. And US is kind of more conservative in this regard in terms of targeted sanctions. The European Union has many more people on the lists already in Belarus among the government officials and kind of supporters of the Lukashenko regime than the United States. But I have seen calls to actually significantly expand the list to like not make it be in the dozens, but actually make it in the hundreds to really hit the Lukashenko apparatus and his cronies. There are also renewed calls to actually impose sectoral sanctions and specifically target the petrochemical industry. In Belarus, as you may know, Belarus is the leading producer of potash in the world.
This is a fertilizer, right?
It's a fertilizer. Well, it's used for a number of various like chemical processes, but potash fertilizer is the primary application, as well as other like nitrogen fertilizers and things like that. And Belarus Kali, which is a potash producing company in Belarus, is one of the largest, if not the largest, state-owned enterprises. And right now it's not under sanctions. And we know, for example, when the United States OFAC sanctions were imposed on
the Office of Foreign Asset Control. OFAC.
Correct.
You can't stump me with an acronym. I've been doing this for too long.
So when they were imposed like about 10, 11 years ago on Belneftekhim, which is a petrochemical conglomerate it's like an umbrella company for a number of state-owned enterprises in this industry. After those sanctions were imposed, Belneftekhim actually exited that conglomerate, and it's pretty obvious that it was done in order to avoid the sanctions.
So, to what extent are European policy options in terms of imposing sectoral sanctions, which would be a major escalation? To what extent are those policy options hamstrung by the fact that much of the natural gas that flows from Russia to Europe passes through Belarus?
Right. So there are both arguments pro and con, and one of them is very much energy dependency related. And another argument is actually focusing on the fact that a lot of Belarusian citizens are actually employed in these industries. And so if you sanction those industries, you might be hitting Belarusian citizens hard. But there has been a growing kind of consensus on the other side that there is so much disdain among Belarusian citizens who are employed in the state-owned sector that sanctions are actually necessary, and that Belarusian residents would actually welcome them. In terms of oil, the oil sector, the way I understand it, actually focuses on refining oil that comes from Russia. And so for many, many years, Belarus has been hostage to very lucrative oil prices, essentially much lower than other available market prices, for the Belarusian oil companies to purchase the oil, refine it, and then export it. And a couple of years ago, in 2019, when the negotiations for the Russia-Belarus union state were reaching kind of a milestone. They were reaching a deadline on agreeing on certain roadmaps. We actually saw that Russia used oil prices and oil supplies as an important piece of those negotiations,
including. Sorry, go ahead.
including like removing those like very, very lucrative oil prices to the point that Belarus started exploring possibility of importing oil from Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan.
So you just referred to this potential kind of union of Belarus and Russia that Vladimir Putin very much wants to see happen, but Lukashenko is rather lukewarm towards, and I think it speaks to the broader kind of frenemy relationship that the two men have. Although it seems, as a here, let me rephrase that. To what extent does this incident impact their relationship? I mean, we're speaking, I believe, ahead of a meeting that the two men will have in Sochi in the coming days. How do you expect this incident to impact Russian-Belarus relations?
I don't think it will. In fact, there is a decent chance that Russian special services may have had some role in this, either as advisors or otherwise. But it is clearly it is clear that the Russian government knew of this operation ahead of time, and very, very early on, after the incident on Sunday, one of the State Duma deputies actually blurted out that this was an excellently executed special operation by Belarusian security services. So the relationship between Putin and Lukashenko with regard to the Union State, it's an interesting one. Over the last year, so after the negotiations recommenced about the Union State in late 2019, we have seen several meetings between the two of them. And the way these meetings are publicly presented give us an impression that Lukashenko is constantly being put into a subordinate state. So the photo ops, like the official photographs that are being released, portray him as, very obediently taking notes in a notebook as Putin just sits right next to him, spread on the armchair. And it's things like that. And there have been a number of these very obviously staged photo ops that kind of very bluntly show Lukashenko his place. So I think Lukashenko is between two very hard spots right now. And as he is being cornered, he is going further and further into this abyss.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like he's just becoming more and more reliant on Russia, which makes him more and more dependent on their largesse, which presumably makes his position weaker when it comes to this kind of negotiations over creating this union.
Right.
In the coming weeks, is there anything that you'll be looking towards that will suggest to you how this situation will unfold or play out?
Well, it is definitely going to be interesting to see an independent investigation by the Civilian Aviation Organization. And I'm curious to see how it will play out because this is such a rare incident. There have been others over the years, but it's just so bluntly out of the ordinary that a lot of decision makers are kind of at a loss. Lukashenko is clearly violating kind of the rules of the game and trying to institute his own rules. It will be very interesting to see what the reaction of the U.S. government is going to be in terms of sanction packages, as well as the EU. And very curiously, I wonder if there are going to be any other consequences, for example, with Belarus membership in the Interpol. Because now that Belarus is very clearly showing bad faith in seeking criminals, as current Belarusian government deems them. how can it continue to be a member of the Interpol?
Yeah, it's interesting. So potentially their membership of, say, the International Civil Aviation Organization and the International Criminal Police Organization, Interpol, are both sort of in jeopardy because of this audacious move.
You would want to think so, right?
Potentially, yeah.
Right, potentially. There are a lot of questions in the air of how people will react. Decision makers and leaders of all these international bodies will react to members who are very bluntly acting outside of the state of rules.
Well, Sofya, thank you so much for your time. This was very helpful.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Sofya. That was interesting and obviously very timely. And I'll be sure to follow events as they unfold in Belarus. And stay tuned next week for a very special announcement from the podcast. I do not want to spoil the news, but the next episode you will hear is going to be very special. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.